Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We are headed into our final segment of the day, which is going to be making the best possible NBA playoffs. This is based off of matchups, and the one qualifier for this is they did have to be conceivable. For example, the Celtics and Bucks could not, of course, play each other in the first round. So just sort of an over-the-top example there, but you'll see as we go on here. Starting in the Eastern Conference, and speaking of the Celtics, they are already locked into being the 1 seed, and I have them playing against the Miami Heat, a rematch of the Eastern Conference Finals. These teams have faced off in 3 of the last 4 Eastern Conference Finals. Definitely a lot of baggage in this matchup, and for me as a Celtics fan, I personally don't want to see this because I just want to see the Celtics win, and I do think that the Heat, despite how bad their offense has been at times during the regular season, could still come away with this. We just have seen the level of play that the Heat are able to take themselves up to surpass expectations during the playoffs, obviously most notably last year, but even in years past, you can probably make the argument that in 2020, while I definitely don't think the Celtics were ready to be, true finals winners, I still think that you can make an argument they were more talented than the Heat in that series. And then last year it was Caleb Martin coming alive and ultimately burning them in that one. So a lot of baggage in this matchup. Again, for me, as a Celtics fan, I don't want to see it, but also if you're the Celtics here and you consider yourselves to be championship contenders, you probably do sneaky want to play the Heat, or at least if you have a level of pride that an NBA Finals team should have, you should probably want to play the Heat in the first round to get that monkey off your back and to sort of assert yourselves, no, this is our conference, despite what the seedings may show. We need to knock off the team from the Eastern Conference, the Eastern Conference winners from last season. That's why I have Celtics versus Heat as the 1 versus 8. The 2 versus 7, I have the Bucks versus the 76ers. Giannis versus Embiid, 2 perennial MVP candidates facing off. Still a question of whether or not we're going to get a fully healthy Embiid. What percent of Embiid can we get in this matchup? But honestly, like I talked about in the second segment as well, I do think it's, understandable that the 76ers could possibly knock off the Bucks here. Outside of the top 2 players in this conference, with Giannis and Embiid being a little bit of a wash, 76ers, you can make an argument if you were to draft players from this series. I think Tyrese Maxey probably goes ahead of Damian Lillard. I think the likes of a Tobias Harris may go over Chris Middleton. Now, Chris Middleton's been playing well lately, and you do have to acknowledge that he has a history of in the postseason showing up. Definitely more to the level than Tobias Harris does, but I think that the coaching advantage probably goes to the 76ers with Nick Nurse as well. Would be a very interesting matchup in my eyes. 3 versus 6 seed in the East, I have the Knicks and the Orlando Magic. Listen, this might not be the most aesthetically appeasing game, or appealing, take your pick, but it might not be the prettiest game between these teams, but 2 defensive juggernauts that would be a little bit of a bloodbath, I think. Would be a different type of series than a lot of the high-scoring games we see in the NBA as things currently stand. But this and the 4-5 matchup of the Cavs and Pacers also sets up some really interesting potential second-round matchups, where the biggest reason for those is the Celtics potentially facing the Knicks in the second round, where you get a little bit of a rivalry series there, 2 historic franchises, and would be a little bit of a grudge match. Kristaps Porzingis versus the Knicks. Magic could also be a sneaky series for the Celtics as well. Also, if you have the Heat coming out of that Celtics-Heat matchup, you would have a rematch of the second round from last year with the Knicks and Heat, or a potential little Florida thing going on. I think all of the possibilities out of this one are a lot of fun. And on the other side of the Eastern Conference, maybe having a chance of the Milwaukee Bucks facing off against the Indiana Pacers to build off of that rivalry that we saw brewing earlier this year. There was the in-season tournament game that got a little bit chippy at times. The Pacers end up winning that game, and part of the aftermath of that was Adrian Griffin shortly getting fired after that because of some of the locker room interactions that took place after that loss. And then, of course, we had the game ball situation where Giannis was running around the court like a madman trying to track down the ball after he scored a franchise record 64 points. And Indiana had stolen the game ball because of the fact that Oscar Tshiebwe recorded his first ever official NBA points in that one. So another very interesting storyline that could come in the second round there. I do think the Pacers or Cavs could give the Bucks a series as well, and would be very interesting to see. For all of this to happen, the 1 through 6 seeds would stay the same, and it would be Philly beating Miami in the 7-8 game, and the Heat beating either Chicago or Atlanta, whoever comes out of the 9-10 matchup. If you want to sort of extend this exercise a little bit too, I think that the Bulls beating the Hawks would be a bigger... Bulls beating the Hawks would lead for a more entertaining game for that final playoff spot, as the Bulls actually had a lead against the Heat before the Heat became this juggernaut in the playoffs. They had the lead late in that game in the fourth quarter before the Heat came back, and then ultimately from that game catapulted themselves into the NBA Finals as well. So I do think this is a very possible outcome, and again, a lot of compelling second round matchups that could come of that as well. But looking at the Western Conference playoffs, I have the Nuggets versus the Lakers as the 1 versus 8 seed. Another rematch of the conference finals. Crazy how in both conferences we have a conceivable idea, and that's also because both the Heat and the Lakers last year came out of the play-in tournament as well. So, you know, you look at that series, sure, it was a sweep between the Nuggets and the Lakers, but it was probably the most entertaining sweep in NBA history, with every game going down to the wire, being entertaining, and ultimately it was the Nuggets coming out in that one. But that is what I would have for the 1 versus 8. 2 versus 7, I have the Thunder versus the Suns. A lot of hungry new players in the Thunder organization versus the established veterans in Kevin Durant, Devin Booker, and the Suns. There isn't necessarily that dominant big man on the Suns that you do sort of worry about with the Thunder a little bit, as they have a lack of size outside of Chet Holmgren. Jalen Williams, the second one from Arkansas, not J-Dub, but he's actually been playing pretty well for them as well. But ultimately, you know, a big dominating center could potentially threaten the Thunder's chances of being a, you know, team that advances to the second round, and I don't think that the Suns have that. I do think that these teams would be very evenly matched up. You have a little Shai Gilgeous-Alexander versus Devin Booker matchup from some of these new generation guards. Kevin Durant, in theory, would be the best player on the court. Probably would be, unless Shai has something to say about that. And then the 3 versus 6 matchup, I have the Timberwolves versus the Pelicans. Two physical teams. Injury status with Cat would definitely have to be monitored for this one because they lose the size without him. But both teams centered around a lot of youth talent, but feel like they are ready to compete. Anthony Edwards versus Zion Williamson. The back-to-back first overall picks in 2019 and 2020, and two potential candidates for the next face of the NBA. And then 4 versus 5 seed, Clippers versus Mavericks. Luka's revenge against the Clippers, where these teams faced off in 2019-20 and 2020-21. The Clippers won both times, most recently coming back from a 3-2 deficit to win. But Luka really put himself on the big stage with these series at the time, where he averaged 33.5 points per game, 9.5 assists, 8.8 rebounds on 49-39 shooting splits. I think that the 2019-20 series was probably the best playoff series we've seen from Kawhi Leonard in a Clippers jersey, where he averaged 32.8 points per game, 10.2 rebounds, 5.2 assists, and played tremendous defense throughout. Was an iconic matchup between these two teams and would be very fun to watch. These seedings would also set up a potential battle of LA in the second round if it were to be the Lakers somehow pulling off the upset against the Nuggets and the Clippers coming out on top. But more likely it is Denver moving on to face either the Clippers or the Mavs. Both matchups would be interesting in my eyes, where the Clippers spent most of the year with the third best odds to win the championship, second best odds to come out of the Western Conference, and we just recently saw the Nuggets versus Mavericks game on St. Patrick's Day end with a classic and a Kyrie game winner with one of the most improbable shots that we have seen. So would be a ton of fun there. And then the other side of the West bracket would feature the possibility of the Suns versus a couple of different young matchups that would test them well in the Pelicans and the Timberwolves. Maybe we see the Suns come out on top of that as well. I think that that's probably the least entertaining of sort of the second round matchups that we've laid out, but could definitely still be fun. In order for this to all happen, the Nuggets would have to pass the Thunder for the 1 seed. They're currently 0.5 games back. The Suns would have to beat the Kings in the 7-8 game, and then the Lakers would have to beat, you would think, in theory, the Warriors, maybe the Rockets, if the Rockets can put together this improbable run, and then the Lakers would have to beat the Kings as well to get to that 8 seed. I'd say this is definitely less likely than what I laid out in the East. The Nuggets are probably cool with coasting into the playoffs a little bit. Jamal Murray has missed the last 5 games with a knee injury. With his track record and just how important he is to the team, the Nuggets are slow playing his return a little bit here. And for the Nuggets, can't imagine they're all too worried about home court advantage in whatever series against either the Thunder or the Timberwolves, where some younger teams that definitely are talented, but again, I just don't think that the Nuggets are really scared of either one of them. So we'll see. They're still 3-2 without Murray, so not bad, but we'll see whether or not they can overtake the Thunder for the 1 seed. And then the play-in is a little bit of a toss-up. I do think that there's a good chance that it could be the Suns and Lakers coming out in that order, but it would require Anthony Davis and the Lakers to beat Domantas Sabonis and the Kings. Sabonis notably has a 10-0 career record over Anthony Davis. That has been a storyline really coming into, it's gotten more spotlight this season, so we'll see about all of that. But I do feel like there's a lot of compelling storylines that could be taking place in the playoffs. We'll see which of them we get. But on that note, we are going to be, that's all we have time for today. We are going to be logging off here. We will be back tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. And we will see you tomorrow. Have a good one. Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't wanna go to